Professor Kim Hana felt her stomach drop as the massive transport shuttle came to a gentle stop. Through the thick viewing window, she could see the most incredible sight of her life. The Galactic Educational Consortium's Academy station stretched out before her like a floating city made of crystal and light. Towers spiraled upward in impossible curves, and bridges of pure energy connected different sections that seemed to defy the laws of physics she had learned back on Earth. She pressed her face against the cool glass, watching alien ships of every shape and size dock at various ports. Some looked like living creatures with flowing tentacles, while others were perfect geometric shapes that hurt her eyes to look at directly. A few seemed to be made entirely of light, shifting and pulsing as they moved through space. The shuttle door hissed open with a sound that reminded her of steam escaping from her grandmother's old kettle. Hana took a deep breath and stepped onto the gleaming floor. The surface beneath her feet felt warm and seemed to pulse with a gentle rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. She had read about this in the briefing materials, but experiencing it was completely different. The entire station was alive in some way, responding to the presence of its inhabitants. Other passengers from different worlds moved past her, and Hana tried not to stare too obviously. A group of beings that looked like walking trees shuffled, by their bark-like skin rustling with each step. Behind them floated a creature that appeared to be made entirely of swirling purple gas, contained within what looked like a soap bubble. The variety was overwhelming and beautiful at the same time. A tall figure approached her, and Hana recognized the distinctive silver skin and forearms of a Zenthari administrator. She had studied their species extensively during her preparation for this assignment. The Zenthari were known throughout the galaxy for their love of order, schedules, and precise planning. They ran most of the major educational institutions because of their ability to organize complex systems. Professor Kim Hana of Earth, the administrator said in perfectly pronounced English, though its voice had a metallic quality that made her think of wind chimes. I am Administrator Quill. We have been expecting you. Hana bowed slightly, remembering the cultural briefing about showing respect to station authority figures. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm honored to be here. Administrator Quill's large, dark eyes studied her with what she could only describe as nervous curiosity. Yes, well, your species has quite a reputation. Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world, making humans the most resilient species we have encountered. Your survival instincts are legendary, but also concerning to some of our faculty members. As they walked through the main corridor, Hana noticed other beings stopping to stare at her. Some whispered to each other in languages that sounded like musical notes or clicking sounds. A few actually stepped back when she passed, as if she might suddenly become dangerous. She had expected this reaction, but it still felt strange to be seen as some kind of super soldier when she was just a teacher who loved working with students. The corridor opened into a vast central area that took Hana's breath away. The ceiling stretched up so high that she couldn't see the top, and it was filled with what looked like floating islands connected by bridges of light. Students from dozens of different species moved between these islands, some flying, some climbing, and others using transportation methods she couldn't even begin to understand. Your classroom is on level 7, Administrator Quill explained, gesturing toward one of the floating islands. We have assigned you a diverse group of students for your first semester. This will test your human teaching methods against our established educational protocols. They entered what looked like a tube of light, and suddenly Hana felt herself being gently lifted upward. It was like being in an elevator, but without walls or floor. She tried to look calm and professional, while her heart raced with excitement and terror in equal measure. When they reached level 7, Hana got her first look at her new classroom. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls seemed to be made of liquid that constantly shifted colors, and the desks appeared to mold themselves to whatever species was sitting in them. At the front of the room was a teaching area that looked like it could project three-dimensional images into the air. Your students represent some of our most challenging species to educate together, Administrator Quill explained with what might have been a smile. The crystalline Vithrak naturally thrive in temperatures that would freeze most other species solid. They think in mathematical patterns and find emotional concepts difficult to understand. Hana nodded, making mental notes as she looked around the room. She could see areas that seemed designed for different environmental needs. The aquatic nereids have never experienced solid water in any form, the administrator continued. They live their entire lives in liquid environments and find the concept of permanent shapes confusing. They communicate through chemical signals as much as spoken language. Through one of the transparent walls, Hana could see what looked like a swimming pool area connected to the main classroom. The water inside glowed with a soft blue light and seemed to move in patterns too complex to be natural. And the Etherians, Administrator Quill's voice took on a tone of particular concern, exist as gaseous beings within protective atmospheric bubbles. They have never had physical bodies and find the concept of solid matter both fascinating and terrifying. Hana watched as several soap bubble-like spheres floated past the windows, each containing swirling patterns of colored gas that she now realized were actual students. The idea of teaching beings who had never touched anything solid was both exciting and intimidating. The other faculty members have expressed concern about your teaching methods, Administrator Quill said carefully. Humans are known for their adaptability and creativity, but also for their tendency toward chaos and unpredictability. Our educational system relies on precise schedules, structured learning objectives, and measurable outcomes. Hana smiled, thinking about her lesson plans back on Earth. She had always believed that the best learning happened when students were engaged and excited, not when they were forced to memorize facts according to rigid schedules. This assignment was going to be the ultimate test of that philosophy. I understand your concerns, she said diplomatically, but I think you'll find that human teaching methods can achieve remarkable results, even if they don't always follow traditional patterns. Administrator Quill made a sound that might have been skeptical agreement. We shall see, Professor Kim. Your colleague Lee Minho will arrive next week to assist with the advanced courses. Until then, you will be working alone with what many consider the most difficult class grouping we have ever attempted. As they finished the tour, Hana felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that reminded her of her first day teaching back on Earth. She had no idea that her human adaptability and creativity were about to be tested in ways she never could have imagined. Hana was in the middle of explaining Earth's weather patterns to her confused students when the entire station suddenly shuddered. The gentle humming sound that had become background noise during her 3 weeks at the academy changed to something sharper, more urgent. Emergency lights began flashing in patterns she had never seen before, casting weird shadows across the classroom walls. What's happening? Asked one of her Vithrak students, its crystalline body reflecting the flashing lights like a living prism. The mathematical patterns that usually flowed across its transparent surface had become jagged and chaotic, which Hana had learned meant the creature was experiencing something similar to anxiety. Before she could answer, the station's central computer began speaking in multiple languages at once. The English translation came through clearly. Solar flare detected. Magnitude 7.4. All personnel prepare for electromagnetic disruption. Emergency protocols activating in 30 seconds. Hana had read about solar flares in her briefing materials, but she had never experienced one. Back on Earth, they caused problems with satellites and power grids, but here in space, directly exposed to the radiation, the effects were much more dramatic. She watched through the classroom's transparent walls as the space around the station began to glow with an eerie green light, like the aurora borealis but much more intense. The temperature began dropping almost immediately. Hana could see her breath forming small clouds in the air, something that should have been impossible in the station's carefully controlled environment. Her students started making sounds of distress as their environmental suits began working harder to maintain their individual climate needs. Then the snow started falling. At first, Hana thought she was imagining things. White flakes began drifting down from hidden dispensers in the ceiling, so light and delicate that they seemed to dance in the air rather than fall. But within minutes, the gentle dusting had become a proper snowfall, with flakes the size of coins dropping steadily throughout the corridor outside their classroom. Emergency insulation protocol activated, the computer announced. Artificial precipitation will continue until hull temperature stabilizes. Estimated duration, 4 to 6 hours. Her students pressed their faces against the transparent walls, their expressions ranging from terror to fascination. The aquatic Nereids were particularly captivated, having never seen water in its solid form. They swam excitedly in their mobile water tanks, creating bubbles and swirls as they tried to understand what they were witnessing. Professor Kim, one of the gaseous Etherians, spoke through its translation device, its voice sounding like wind through leaves. "Is this dangerous? Should we be afraid?" Hana was about to reassure them when alarms began sounding throughout the station. Through the walls, she could see Zenthari faculty members running through the corridors, their forearms moving in precise coordination as they activated emergency procedures. Other species were disappearing into what looked like metallic cocoons that emerged from the walls, emergency shelters designed to protect them from environmental hazards. Her wrist communicator buzzed, and Park Jiwon's worried face appeared on the small screen. Jiwon was her teaching assistant, a young Korean woman who had arrived on the station just 2 weeks ago as part of the cultural exchange program. She was currently in the administrative section, helping to coordinate the human response to the emergency. "Professor Kim, are you safe? The administrators are going crazy here. They want all classes immediately transferred to virtual reality environments until the storm passes. They're saying the temperature drop and electromagnetic interference make physical classrooms too dangerous." Hana looked around at her students who were watching the conversation with intense curiosity. The snow outside had gotten heavier, transforming the familiar corridors into something that looked like a winter wonderland. The usually sterile, perfectly controlled environment of the academy had become something magical and unpredictable. "How long until the virtual systems are ready?" she asked Jiwon. "At least 2 hours. The electromagnetic interference is making it difficult to establish stable connections. Most species are just huddling in their emergency shelters until it passes." Hana noticed that her students weren't showing signs of real distress anymore. The initial shock had worn off, and now they seemed genuinely curious about what was happening. The Vithrak students were particularly intrigued by the snow, their mathematical minds trying to calculate the patterns of falling flakes. The Nereids were making excited clicking sounds as they watched the white powder accumulate on surfaces. Even the Etherians had moved closer to the walls, their gaseous forms swirling with what she had learned to recognize as excitement. She thought about her teaching philosophy back on Earth. Some of her best lessons had happened during unexpected moments when she had thrown out her planned curriculum and followed her students' natural curiosity. Snow days had always been special times when children discovered joy in unexpected places and learned lessons that couldn't be taught from textbooks. "Professor Kim?" Jiwon's voice brought her back to the present. "What should I tell the administrators? They're getting really impatient." Hana looked at the wonder in her students' faces as they watched the snow continue to fall. She saw the Vithrak students trying to touch the glass where flakes were sticking, their mathematical minds clearly working on some fascinating calculation. The Nereids were swimming in excited circles, creating patterns in their tanks that seemed to mirror the swirling snow outside. The Etherians had formed a small group, their gaseous bodies pulsing with colors she had never seen before. This was a moment that would never come again. Her students were witnessing something completely outside their normal experience, something that was sparking curiosity and wonder in ways that no planned lesson ever could. The rigid Zenthari educational system would have them locked away in virtual reality classrooms, missing this incredible opportunity for real hands-on learning. She made a decision that surprised even herself. "Jiwon, tell the administrators that we won't be needing the virtual classroom today." She could see her assistant's eyes widen in shock on the small screen. "Tell them we're going to experience this storm directly. We're having what humans call a snow day." "A what day?" Jiwon asked, looking confused. Hana smiled as she walked toward the classroom door controls. "A snow day. It's when humans cancel all their planned activities to go outside and play in the snow. It's one of our most important educational traditions." Through the communicator, she could hear urgent voices in the background as Jiwon relayed the message. The response was immediate and loud, though she couldn't make out the specific words. She could imagine the Zenthari administrators trying to process the concept of intentionally disrupting their carefully planned schedules. "Professor, they're saying this is completely against protocol," Jiwon said, looking nervous. "They want to know if you've lost your mind." Hana laughed as she activated the door controls. The barrier between her classroom and the snow-filled corridor began to dissolve. "Tell them that sometimes the best education happens when you throw the protocol out the window. Tell them we're about to demonstrate one of humanity's greatest survival skills, the ability to find joy and learning in chaos." Her students watched in amazement as the door opened completely, and the first snowflakes began drifting into their classroom. The adventure was about to begin. The moment Hana stepped into the snow-filled corridor, she felt like a child again. The crisp air filled her lungs, and snowflakes landed gently on her face, melting instantly against her warm skin. Behind her, she could hear her students making uncertain sounds as they encountered something completely outside their normal experience. "It's cold," observed one of the Vithrak students, its crystalline body shimmering as it stepped carefully into the white powder, but not unpleasant cold, mathematical cold, precise cold. Hana knelt down and scooped up a handful of snow, watching her students' reactions as she demonstrated its basic properties. On Earth, when snow falls like this, human children don't stay inside studying. They go out and play. They explore, they discover things that can't be learned from books. The aquatic Nereids were the most hesitant at first. They had moved their mobile water tanks to the corridor entrance but seemed afraid to venture further. Solid water was a concept they understood intellectually, but seeing it in person was clearly overwhelming. "Is it dangerous?" asked one of the Nereids, its voice bubbling through the translation system attached to its tank. "Will it hurt us?" Hana smiled and gently tossed the handful of snow into the air, letting it scatter harmlessly around them. "Watch this," she said, then did something that made all her students gasp in amazement. She lay down on her back in the snow and began moving her arms and legs, creating what every human child knows as a snow angel. When she stood up, the impression left in the snow looked like a winged creature. The students stared at it in wonder, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, chimes, and musical tones that filled the corridor. "You made art," whispered one of the Etherians, its gaseous form swirling with colors that Hana had learned indicated deep emotion. "With your body, in the cold water that falls from sky." That's when the magic really began. The first Vithrak student to truly engage was named Keth, according to the translation patterns that appeared above its crystalline head. Keth began carefully shaping snow with its precise, mathematical movements. But something unexpected happened. As Keth worked, light from the corridor's illumination system began passing through its transparent body and refracting through the snow sculptures it was creating. The effect was breathtaking. Rainbow patterns began dancing across the walls as the light bounced between Keith's crystalline structure and the carefully shaped snow. Other Vithrak students quickly joined in, and soon the entire corridor was filled with moving patterns of color that shifted and changed as they worked. "We are making mathematics visible," Keth said, its voice filled with wonder. "The snow holds the light patterns. We can create equations in 3 dimensions that others can see." Meanwhile, the Nereids had overcome their initial fear and discovered something remarkable about their own abilities. Their fluid movements, evolved over millions of years of swimming, made them incredibly gifted at shaping and throwing snow. When one of them accidentally created what humans would recognize as a snowball, the others became fascinated by the perfect sphere of compressed frozen water. What happened next surprised everyone, including Hana. The Nereids began having what could only be described as a snowball fight, but their version was unlike anything humans had ever imagined. Their throws were impossibly accurate, and they could curve the snowballs through the air in ways that defied physics. Soon they were laughing, a sound like water flowing over stones as they engaged in the most joyful battle the station had ever seen. The gaseous Etherians discovered they could manipulate snow in ways that no solid being could imagine. By carefully controlling the air pressure within their protective bubbles, they learned to create miniature tornadoes of snow that spiraled through the corridor like living sculptures. These snow tornadoes would form, dance through the air for several minutes, then gently dissolve back into individual flakes. But the most remarkable thing was the sound. As her students played and explored, they began making noises that Hana had never heard before. The Vithrak's usual mathematical clicking became something more musical. The Nereids' bubbling communications turned into what could only be called singing. The Etherians' wind-like voices became a harmony that seemed to make the very air shimmer. It was alien laughter. Pure, joyful, spontaneous laughter echoing through corridors that had never known such sounds. Other students began gathering at windows and doorways throughout the station. Hana could see faces pressed against transparent barriers, watching in amazement as species that had never interacted casually began playing together. A group of insectoid HFY students had opened their classroom door and were cautiously approaching, their compound eyes reflecting the rainbow light patterns created by the Vithrak. "Professor Kim!" Hana turned to see Cho Sujin running down the corridor, slipping slightly on the snow in her hurry. Sujin was another human teaching assistant who had arrived on the previous transport, specializing in interspecies psychology. Her face showed a mixture of concern and amazement as she took in the scene. "The administrators are going absolutely crazy," Sujin said, slightly out of breath. "They're saying this is the most disruptive event in the station's history. But Professor, you need to see what's happening in the observation decks." Sujin pulled out her portable display unit and showed Hana the security feeds from around the station. On screen after screen, she could see faculty members and students from every department gathering to watch the unprecedented display of joy happening in the human sector. Some were taking notes, others were recording everything, and a few were actually arguing with their own administrators about joining the activities. The mollusk professor Dr. Tentaclius abandoned her quantum mechanics lecture, Sujin reported, scrolling through the feeds. She said her students couldn't concentrate because they kept asking about the happiness sounds coming from this sector. And look at this. The display showed a group of elderly Xanthari administrators standing at a panoramic window, their forearms gesturing rapidly as they engaged in what appeared to be an intense discussion. Unlike their usual calm, controlled demeanor, they seemed genuinely excited about something. "They're debating whether to classify this as educational research or a complete breakdown of academic order," Sujin explained. "But here's the really interesting part. Student engagement scores are spiking throughout the entire station. Even students who aren't participating directly are showing increased brain activity and curiosity levels." Hana looked around at her students, who had now formed mixed groups of different species all playing together in ways that would have been impossible in a traditional classroom setting. The Vithrak were teaching the Etherians how to create light patterns, while the Nereids were showing everyone their amazing snowball techniques. "Sujin," she said, watching an Etherian help a Vithrak student create an incredibly complex snow sculpture. "I think we're witnessing something that's never happened before in galactic education." "What's that?" Hana smiled as the sound of alien laughter continued to echo through the halls. "We're watching different species learn that joy is a universal language." Within an hour of the snow day beginning, the station's internal communication system was buzzing with activity. Unlike anything in its recorded history, messages were flying between departments, faculty members were abandoning their posts, and students throughout the academy were pressing their faces against windows to catch glimpses of what was happening in the human sector. Dr. Kepler was in the middle of explaining quantum entanglement to her advanced physics class when the first reports reached her. As a mollusk, she had 8 flexible arms and a brain that processed information in ways that made most other species dizzy just thinking about it. She was known throughout the galaxy as one of the most brilliant theoretical physicists alive, someone who thought in mathematical equations that took up entire walls. But when her students kept getting distracted by sounds coming from the corridor, she made a decision that shocked everyone in her classroom. "Class dismissed," she announced, her tentacle-like arms waving in patterns that indicated deep curiosity. "We're going to investigate this phenomenon firsthand." She led her confused students out of the lecture hall and toward the human sector, her large, intelligent eyes taking in everything. When she saw the snow-covered corridors filled with laughing students from multiple species, something clicked in her brilliant mind. This wasn't chaos. It was a complex system operating on principles she had never considered. Within minutes, Dr. Kepler was on her hands and knees, or rather, on 4 of her 8 arms, helping a group of mixed-species students construct what could only be described as an architectural marvel made entirely of snow. Her mathematical mind calculated angles and structural integrity, while her students provided creative input about design and decoration. "Professor," one of her confused physics students asked, "shouldn't we be studying quantum mechanics?" "Doctor," Kepler looked up from the snow fortress she was helping to build, her eyes bright with excitement. "My dear student, we are studying quantum mechanics. We're just doing it with snow instead of equations. Watch how these crystals bond together, observe the energy transfer between different temperatures, calculate the probability matrices of structural collapse. This is applied physics in its purest form." The ripple effect continued to spread throughout the station like water flowing downhill. In another sector, the HFY students were experiencing something that their species had never encountered before: individual creativity. The HFY were an insectoid species that thought only in terms of collective efficiency. Every action had to serve the greater good of the hive. Every decision was made by group consensus, and individual expression was considered wasteful and potentially dangerous. They were excellent students because they could process and memorize vast amounts of information quickly, but they had never been asked to create something just for the joy of it. When the first HFY student attempted to make a snow angel, the results were unlike anything Hana had ever seen. With 6 arms and 4 legs, the impression left in the snow looked like something between a geometric pattern and abstract art. Other HFY students gathered around to study the creation, their compound eyes reflecting the light patterns created by nearby Vithrak students. "This serves no practical purpose," observed one HFY student, but its voice carried curiosity rather than criticism. "Exactly," replied the student who had made the snow angel. "And yet I feel satisfied by its creation. Is this what other species call happiness?" Soon, dozens of HFY students were creating their own snow angels, each one unique and individual. For the first time in their species' recorded history, they were expressing personal creativity rather than collective efficiency. The psychological implications were staggering. Meanwhile, in the administrative center of the station, the Zenthari officials were watching everything through security feeds, their precise minds struggling to process what they were witnessing. The Zenthari prided themselves on order, predictability, and measured outcomes. Their educational system was built on the principle that learning could be quantified, scheduled, and optimized for maximum efficiency. Head Administrator Nexus was a particularly rigid example of his species, someone who hadn't deviated from a planned schedule in over 40 years. His forearms moved in agitated patterns as he watched screen after screen showing faculty and students abandoning their assigned activities to participate in what he could only classify as educational anarchy. "This must be stopped," he declared to his fellow administrators. "The humans are destroying centuries of carefully developed academic protocols. We need to implement emergency containment procedures immediately." But even as he spoke, his assistants were showing him data that didn't make sense according to traditional educational theory. Student engagement levels were higher than they had ever recorded. Brain activity scans showed unprecedented levels of creativity and problem-solving across multiple species. Most surprisingly, students who weren't even participating directly in the snow day activities were showing improved learning outcomes in their regular classes. When Administrator Nexus finally confronted Hana directly, marching into the corridor where she was teaching her students how to build snow sculptures, he was prepared for a battle of educational philosophies. "Professor Kim," he said, his metallic voice cutting through the sounds of laughter and play, "you must explain this disruption immediately. Our systems cannot categorize what is happening here. Students are abandoning structured learning environments. Faculty members are ignoring scheduled curricula. The entire academic order of this station is breaking down." Hana looked up from where she was helping a young Etherian learn to manipulate snow with its gaseous appendages. Around them, the corridor was filled with the most diverse group of students and faculty members she had ever seen, all working together on projects. that had emerged naturally from their curiosity and joy. "Administrator Nexus," she said calmly, "what you're seeing isn't the breakdown of education. It's education in its purest form. These students are learning more about physics, chemistry, psychology, and social interaction in one afternoon than they would in months of traditional lectures." "But there are no measurable learning objectives," the administrator protested. "No scheduled outcomes, no standardized assessments." Hannah smiled as she watched Dr. Kepler explain complex mathematical principles to a group of fascinated students, using snow formations as visual aids. The best learning can't always be measured by your standards. Adaptability, creativity, joy, cooperation across species barriers, problem-solving in unexpected situations. These are skills that emerge naturally when students are engaged and excited about discovery. Park Young-ho, a human exchange student who had been studying alien psychology, was documenting everything with advanced recording equipment. As one of the few humans on the station who wasn't faculty, he had a unique perspective on what was happening. "Professor Kim," he said, approaching with his recording device, "I've been analyzing the social dynamics of what's happening here. We're witnessing the first recorded instance of spontaneous interspecies cooperation on this scale. Students who have never interacted outside of formal academic settings are forming friendships, sharing knowledge, and creating things together." Young-ho showed her his data on a portable screen. "The psychological barriers between species are dissolving. The HFY are experiencing individual creativity for the first time. The Vithrak are learning that mathematics can be beautiful as well as precise. The Nereids are discovering that solid matter can be just as fluid and dynamic as their aquatic environment." Administrator Nexus listened to this explanation, his forearms moving in patterns that Hannah had learned indicated deep confusion. His species' rigid thinking was being challenged in ways that had never happened before. "But what about educational standards?" he asked, though his voice had lost some of its authority. "What about measurable progress and academic accountability?" Hannah gestured toward the corridor full of engaged, excited students from dozens of different species. "Look around you, Administrator. Show me any traditional classroom where students are this engaged, this creative, this willing to cooperate across species boundaries. Show me any standardized test that can measure the joy of discovery or the skill of adapting to unexpected situations." As if to emphasize her point, a group of students nearby erupted in cheers as they successfully completed a complex snow sculpture that incorporated elements from each of their species' artistic traditions. The sight of beings from completely different worlds celebrating together was something that no amount of scheduled cultural exchange programs had ever achieved. The revolution was spreading, and there was no stopping it now. The snow was melting, but something magical had been born that would never disappear. As the station's environmental systems hummed back to life and normal temperatures returned to the corridors, Hannah stood watching her students reluctantly return to their regular classrooms. But everything had changed. The way they walked together, the way they looked at each other, the way they communicated across species barriers that had existed for thousands of years. It was all different now. The crystalline Vithrak students were still glowing with residual light patterns from their snow sculptures. Mathematical formulas dancing across their transparent bodies that seemed more alive and creative than their usual rigid calculations. The aquatic Nereids were making excited bubbling sounds to each other, their first experience with solid water having opened up entirely new ways of thinking about their environment. The gaseous Etherians floated close together, their atmospheric bubbles occasionally merging and separating in ways that suggested they had formed friendships that transcended their usual individual isolation. But the real surprise came 3 days later, when a formal petition appeared on Administrator Nexus's desk. "What is this?" he asked his assistant, holding up the document with 2 of his forearms while the other 2 gestured in patterns indicating confusion and concern. "It's a student petition, sir," the assistant replied nervously. "They're requesting that the Academy implement regular adaptive learning periods based on the human teaching methods they experienced during the environmental emergency." Administrator Nexus read through the petition with growing amazement. It wasn't just signed by Hannah's students. It had signatures from over 3,000 students representing 47 different species throughout the academy. Students who had only observed the snow day from their windows, students who had never even met the humans, students from advanced graduate programs who had been studying at the academy for years. They want us to schedule unscheduled learning, Administrator Nexus said, his metallic voice carrying a tone that suggested his precise mind was struggling with the contradiction. They want us to plan for spontaneous discovery. They want us to create structured opportunities for unstructured exploration. The petition included detailed reports from students describing how the single afternoon of snow day activities had taught them more about cooperation, creativity, and cross-species understanding than their entire previous academic careers. Dr. Kepler had written a supporting statement explaining how her physics students had demonstrated better grasp of complex mathematical concepts after building snow sculptures than they had shown in months of traditional lectures. Even more surprising was the faculty response. Professor after professor came forward with their own observations about how the snow day had affected their students' performance in regular classes. Attention spans had improved, creative thinking had increased, and most remarkably, students from different species were now actively seeking out opportunities to work together on projects. Dr. Tentaclius, the distinguished mollusk professor, requested a meeting with the administration to formally propose changes to the Academy's teaching methods. In my 60 years of academic experience, she explained to the assembled administrators, I have never witnessed learning occur at the speed and depth I observed during that single afternoon. The humans have demonstrated something that challenges everything we thought we knew about effective education. The Zenthari administrators found themselves in an impossible situation. Their entire worldview was built on the idea that learning could be optimized through careful planning, precise scheduling, and measurable outcomes. But the data from the snow day was undeniable. Students had learned more, retained more, and developed better problem-solving skills during a few hours of unstructured play than they typically demonstrated in weeks of traditional classes. Administrator Nexus called for a full analysis of the situation, bringing in educational experts from across the galaxy to study what had happened. The results shocked everyone involved in galactic education. The human approach appears to activate learning, centers in the brain that our traditional methods never access, reported Dr. Synthesis, a renowned educational psychologist. When students are engaged in joyful, spontaneous discovery, their minds become exponentially more receptive to new information and creative problem-solving. The evidence was overwhelming, but implementing change in an institution built on rigid structure was incredibly challenging. It took weeks of debate, analysis, and careful planning before the administrators finally made their decision. They would approve the student petition, but in the most Zenthari way possible. They would schedule the unscheduled learning. The Academy announced the implementation of monthly Deathworlder days, periods where normal classes would be suspended, and students would be encouraged to engage in human-style adaptive learning activities. The name itself was a compromise between honoring the human contribution and making it sound official enough for the administrators to accept. News of this revolutionary change spread throughout the galactic education network faster than anyone had expected. Within weeks, academic institutions on hundreds of worlds were requesting detailed reports about the human teaching methods. Universities, training centers, and even military academies began experimenting with their own versions of structured spontaneity. Hana found herself suddenly famous throughout the galaxy, not as a human from a dangerous death world, but as an educational innovator who had unlocked secrets of learning that had been hiding in plain sight for millennia. Her final report to the Galactic Educational Consortium became one of the most widely read academic papers in galactic history. In it, she introduced the concept of constructive disruption, the idea that breaking established patterns and embracing unexpected moments could create more powerful learning experiences than any carefully planned curriculum. Humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, she wrote, is not our ability to survive in impossible conditions or adapt to extreme environments. Our greatest gift is our understanding that joy and learning are not separate things. When students are happy, curious, and engaged, they learn faster, think more creatively, and form stronger connections with others. The universe has spent so much time trying to optimize education that it forgot the most important ingredient: wonder. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. Within a year, adaptive learning periods were being implemented in educational institutions across 47 different star systems. The rigid structure that had dominated galactic education for thousands of years began to soften, making room for creativity, spontaneity, and joy. As Hannah prepared to return to Earth at the end of her assignment, she received visits from students, faculty members, and even administrators who wanted to thank her for changing their lives. The crystalline Vithrak students had learned that mathematics could be beautiful as well as precise. The aquatic Nereids had discovered that collaboration could be more fulfilling than individual achievement. The gaseous Etherians had found that friendship could exist across the vast differences between species. But perhaps the most meaningful visit came from Administrator Nexus himself. The rigid Xanthari official approached her with what might have been nervousness, his forearms moving in patterns she had never seen before. "Professor Kim," he said, his metallic voice softer than usual, "I wanted to personally thank you before your departure. You have taught us something that our species had forgotten in our pursuit of efficiency and order. You have reminded us that learning should bring joy, not just knowledge." Hannah smiled as she looked around the academy one last time. The corridors still looked the same, but they sounded different now. Instead of whispered academic discussions and the quiet hum of perfectly ordered education, she could hear laughter echoing from classrooms, excited conversations between students from different species, and the sounds of genuine discovery happening throughout the station. A simple snow day had changed the entire galaxy's approach to education. As her transport prepared for departure, Hannah couldn't help but wonder what other human traditions might hold the keys to unlocking the universe's greatest mysteries. Sometimes the most profound changes come from the simplest moments of joy.